At Christmas, my nephew mocked my kid, and the very next morning, I canceled my brother's rent. Stay with me while I walk you through what happened, because it's one of those moments that still burns in my chest every time I think about it. My name's Daniel, I'm 38, a single dad to my 10-year-old son Mason. Life hasn't been perfect, but I've worked hard to give him stability. Years ago, I was lucky enough to buy a duplex. I live upstairs, and my younger brother Ethan, who's 35, rents the bottom unit. I gave him a deal so cheap most people wouldn't believe it. Family, right? That's what I thought. I was helping my brother keep a roof over his head while he worked through money problems. Mason is my whole world. He's sensitive, gentle, and the kind of kid who would rather sit and draw superheroes in his notebook than roughhouse like other boys his age. He's been picked on at school before for being different, and I do everything I can to protect him from that kind of cruelty. So, when Christmas came around this year, I wanted to make it special. I hosted Christmas Eve dinner at my place. The house was filled with the smell of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and cinnamon rolls. My parents came by, and of course Ethan, his wife Lindsay, and their son Caleb showed up too. Caleb is 12, loud, cocky, and if I'm honest, spoiled. I've seen his mean streak before, but every time I've pointed it out, Ethan just shrugs it off with a laugh. That night, we sat around the tree after dinner, exchanging gifts. Mason carefully unwrapped his present, a drawing set I knew he'd been wishing for. His face lit up, and he whispered a soft thank you, as he held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then Caleb leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Seriously? That's baby stuff. You're such a baby, Mason." The words hung in the air. Mason's smile faded instantly, his cheeks flushed red, and he stared down at the floor. My stomach dropped. I looked at Ethan, expecting him to say something, to step in and tell his kid to knock it off. But nothing. In fact, Ethan smirked. And Lindsay? She chuckled like it was some harmless joke. My boy sat there embarrassed in front of the whole family, and not a single person stood up for him. Not even his uncle. Not even his aunt. I could see Mason fighting tears, clutching his gift close to his chest as though protecting it from their laughter. I didn't say much that night. I helped clean up dishes, smiled politely, and tried to keep Mason comfortable. But something inside me broke. I realized in that moment that family isn't just blood. It's about who defends you, who protects you. And if my brother couldn't respect my son, then he had no right living under my roof. The next morning, I made my decision. Christmas Eve started off the way I had hoped it would. The house was glowing with lights, the tree sparkled in the corner, and the smell of food filled the air. My parents were laughing with Ethan and Lindsay in the kitchen. Mason sat close to me as we waited to open gifts. And for a brief moment, it felt like maybe this year would be different, like maybe we could have one night of peace and happiness. We all gathered around the tree after dinner, plates still half full on the table, everyone stuffed and cheerful. Mason had been eyeing the gift I wrapped for him for weeks, and when I finally handed it to him, his small hands shook with excitement. He peeled the paper slowly, carefully, almost like he didn't want to ruin the wrapping. That's who he is, gentle, thoughtful, patient. When he saw what was inside, his face lit up brighter than the Christmas lights. It was the art set he'd been dreaming of. Sketch pads, colored pencils, everything he needed to keep creating the superheroes he loved to draw. He whispered, "Thanks, Dad," and hugged the box to his chest like it was priceless. My heart swelled just watching him. That's what Christmas was supposed to feel like, seeing your kid happy, knowing you got it right. But before that warmth could even settle, Caleb leaned over, loud and smug, and said, "Seriously? That's baby stuff. Who even wants crayons and paper? You're such a baby, Mason." The room shifted. The laughter that had been bouncing around just moments before turned sharp. My parents gave awkward smiles, Lindsay chuckled under her breath, and Ethan smirked, shaking his head like Caleb had just said something clever. Mason froze. His cheeks burned red, and he lowered his eyes to the floor. I saw the way he tightened his grip on the box, like if he held it close enough, maybe the words wouldn't sting so bad. I glanced around the room, waiting for anyone to step in. To tell Caleb that wasn't okay. To remind him that Christmas wasn't the time to tear someone down. But no one said a word. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as if his son's cruelty was nothing more than boys being boys. Lindsay smirked like she found it funny. My parents looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. And Mason? My boy swallowed hard, blinking fast, trying to hold back tears at the table. I could see the way his chest rose and fell, how he forced himself not to cry in front of them. He quietly picked at the wrapping paper in his lap, pretending to be busy, pretending their laughter hadn't just crushed him. In that moment, the warmth of Christmas was gone for me. The food, the lights, the music, it all felt like a cover for something rotten underneath. Because nothing cuts deeper than watching your own family laugh while your child is humiliated right in front of them. And the worst part, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Caleb wasn't done, and Ethan wasn't going to stop him. Caleb didn't stop after the first jab. If anything, it seemed like teasing Mason had become his favorite game of the night. While everyone else settled back with pie and coffee, Caleb leaned across the table and said, "Nice sweater, Mason. Did your mom pick that out from the baby section?" He laughed at his own joke, spraying crumbs from the cookie in his mouth. Mason pulled at the sleeves of his sweater, the one my mom had bought him last week because she thought he looked handsome. His face flushed, and he kept his eyes glued to his plate. I wanted to step in, but I waited, hoping Ethan would finally say something. He didn't. He just sat there, sipping his coffee like nothing was happening. Caleb kept going. He noticed Mason's sketchpad poking out of his backpack in the corner and sneered. "Oh, what's in there? Your little cartoons? You think you're going to be some kind of artist? That's so lame." His laugh was louder this time, as if he was daring someone to challenge him. Mason's shoulders sank further. Then, in a small voice only I could hear, Mason leaned toward me and whispered, "Dad, can we go home?" His words broke something inside me. He was asking to leave his own house. The place where he should feel safe. The place I worked so hard to make a home for him. I turned to Ethan, still giving him one last chance, hoping he'd finally draw the line. I said, "Hey, can you talk to your kid? He's going too far." Ethan barely looked up and muttered, "Come on, Dan. Boys will be boys. Mason just needs to stop taking everything so seriously." My jaw tightened. My own brother, brushing it off as if his son's cruelty was just harmless fun. Then Lindsay piped up, not even glancing at Mason, and said, "Honestly, maybe Mason just needs to toughen up. He cries about everything." She laughed softly, like she was sharing a private joke. That was it. My chest burned with anger, but I stayed quiet. It wasn't just Caleb anymore. It was Ethan and Lindsay too. They weren't just failing to stop their son, they were encouraging him. And all of it was happening under my roof, at my table, on Christmas Eve. I looked at Mason. His lips were pressed tight, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to hold back tears. He picked at the crust of his pie, pretending not to hear, but I knew every word was sinking into him like. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered. He gave me a weak nod, but his eyes stayed down. On the outside, I stayed calm, quiet, polite. But inside, I was already making plans. If my brother thought he could let his kid humiliate mine in my own home, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. This was the last Christmas they'd spend under my roof. The night ended sooner than it should have. I gathered our coats, thanked everyone in a tight voice, and walked Mason out to the car. The cold air hit us as we stepped outside, and I could feel how small his hand was in mine, how it trembled just a little. He didn't say anything as we buckled in, and I didn't push. Sometimes silence says more than words. The road was quiet, only the hum of the engine filling the space between us. Christmas lights blinked from the houses we passed, families inside laughing, celebrating, doing what families are supposed to do. But inside my car, there was only the heavy weight of what had just happened. Mason sat in the passenger seat, his little face turned toward the window. His breath fogged the glass as he stared out at the night, clutching his drawing notebook against his chest like it was a shield. I kept glancing at him, my hands tightening around the wheel every time I saw how still he was. He wasn't humming like he usually did when we drove at night. He wasn't flipping through his notebook, showing me sketches of the superheroes he dreamed up. He was just silent, locked inside himself, and it tore me apart. After a long stretch, his voice finally broke through. Soft, almost trembling, he asked, "Dad, why does Caleb hate me?" The question cut through me sharper than any insult ever could. I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes on the road so he wouldn't see the anger boiling in. My first instinct was rage, to curse Caleb, to curse Ethan and Lindsay for letting it happen, for laughing, for making my son feel this way. But I couldn't let Mason see that. He didn't need my anger. He needed comfort. I cleared my throat and said, "Buddy, Caleb doesn't hate you. Some kids, they just don't understand how special someone like you is. And instead of being kind, they act mean. That's on him, not you." Mason shifted a little, hugging the notebook tighter. He didn't argue, but he didn't look convinced either. His reflection in the window showed his eyes glistening, and I knew he was fighting to hold back tears. Inside, my chest burned. It wasn't just Caleb's words that haunted me. It was Ethan sitting there, letting it happen. My own brother. The person I thought I could rely on to have my back. And Lindsay, smirking like mocking a 10-year-old, was somehow funny. That betrayal hurt deeper than anything Caleb could have said. I forced a steady voice and added, "You're amazing, Mason. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. Not Caleb, not anyone." He gave a tiny nod, still staring out the window, but I knew my words barely patched the wound. As I drove us home, I made a silent promise. I would never let Mason feel like this again. Not in my home, not in my family. Something had to change, and soon. Christmas morning should have felt different. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Wrapping paper was scattered around the living room, and Mason was already sitting cross-legged on the floor with one of his new gifts. He had a small smile on his face, but I could see the heaviness from the night before still clinging to him. He wasn't buzzing with excitement the way kids usually are on Christmas morning, and that broke me more than anything. I tried to play along, tried to smile as he tore open another box and whispered his quiet little thank you. But inside, I was still burning. The echoes of Caleb's laughter and Ethan's dismissive shrug replayed over and over in my head. Family should protect each other. Family should protect children. Instead, mine had sat in my house and humiliated my son like it was nothing. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped to the window, staring out at the backyard dusted in snow. My eyes drifted down to the lower half of the duplex, the place Ethan and his family had called home for years. I thought about the rent I charged him, barely half of what anyone else would pay for that space. I thought about how many times I had fixed things for him, how many months I had let him slide when he was short on cash. I had been nothing but generous, bending over backwards to make sure he and his family had stability. And this is how he repaid me, by sitting in my dining room, letting his son bully mine, even smirking while it happened. Suddenly, everything clicked. Why was I sacrificing so much for someone who couldn't even show my son an ounce of respect? Why was I allowing people who didn't value us to live under my roof? The anger inside me cooled into something sharper, something clearer. This wasn't just about Caleb's cruelty anymore. It was about Ethan's failure as a brother, as an uncle, and as a man. And if he couldn't treat my son with kindness, he didn't deserve the privilege of living in my home. I set down my coffee, walked to my desk, and turned on the printer. The words came easily: notice of termination. Effective immediately, 30 days to vacate. The reason? Family disrespect. I typed it plainly because that's what it was. A betrayal by the very people I had been helping all these years. As the printer whirred, Mason peeked his head into the room. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked softly. I smiled at him, keeping my voice calm. "Just taking care of something important, buddy." He nodded, trusting me completely, and went back to his gifts. I picked up the warm paper from the tray and held it in my hands. For the first time since last night, I felt a sense of control return. My brother was about to learn that mocking my child came with consequence. This morning, my revenge was set in motion. I walked down the stairs that morning with the paper folded neatly in my hand. The hallway was quiet, just the creak of each step under my feet and the faint hum of their heater running below. My heart was steady, calmer than I expected. The anger from last night had burned itself into something sharper: resolve. When I reached their door, I knocked firmly. A few moments later, Ethan opened it, hair messy, eyes still heavy with sleep. He squinted at me, then at the paper in my hand. "What's up, man?" "Merry Christmas," he mumbled with a half smile. I didn't smile back. I handed him the paper. "Read it," I said, my voice even. He unfolded it slowly, scanning the words, and then let out a short laugh. "Okay, funny. Real funny. You're serving me an eviction notice on Christmas morning." He shook his head, grinning like it was some kind of joke. But I didn't laugh. "It's not a joke, Ethan. You've got 30 days to move out." His grin faded. "Wait, you're serious?" "Dan, come on. What is this about?" I looked him dead in the eye. "It's about last night. It's about you sitting in my home, letting your kid tear mine apart while you smirked like it was nothing. You don't get to disrespect my son and live under my roof. That ends now." His face darkened, his voice rising. "Are you kidding me? You're throwing us out because Caleb was messing around? He's 12, for God's sake. Boys joke, they tease. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I didn't flinch. Messing around doesn't leave my son asking me on the drive home why his cousin hates him. Messing around doesn't make a kid clutch his notebook like it's the only thing keeping him safe. You didn't just fail to stop Caleb, you encouraged him. And I won't let that happen again. 30 days. Be out. Before Ethan could reply, Lindsay appeared behind him, pulling her robe tighter around her. She snatched the paper from his hands and read it herself. Her face went red, and her voice cut sharp. "Are you serious right now? You're evicting us? On Christmas? What kind of heartless brother does that?" I turned my gaze to her, calm as ever. "The kind of brother who won't let his kid be mocked in his own home. You both made your choice when you laughed instead of stepping in. Now I'm making mine." She threw the paper down on the floor, glaring at me like I'd just betrayed the entire family. Ethan muttered under his breath, pacing back and forth. But I didn't move, didn't soften. Finally, I said it again, clear and final. 30 days. Be out. Then I turned and walked back upstairs, leaving them in stunned silence. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had truly stood up for my son. It didn't take long for the news to spread. By the afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop with calls and messages. First, it was my mom. Her voice was rushed, worried, like the house was already on fire. "Daniel, your brother just called me. He said you're kicking him out. Please, tell me that isn't true. It's Christmas, for heaven's sake." I held the phone to my ear, staring out the window at the snow falling in soft sheets. "It's true, Mom," I said evenly. "He is 30 days. There was silence on the other end, followed by her sigh. "Son, I know Caleb can be a handful, but family should stick together. You don't just throw your brother out into the cold." My jaw tightened. I'd been expecting this. Family should stick together, you're right. But if family doesn't protect my child, then what good is it? He let Mason be humiliated in my home. He laughed at him. "You expect me to ignore that?" She tried again, pleading, saying Ethan didn't mean it that way, that Caleb was just immature. But the more she talked, the clearer I felt. I told her, "Mom, I've let Ethan pay half of what anyone else would for years. I've fixed every broken pipe, every appliance, every leaky faucet for him without charging a dime. I've been generous because he's my brother. But last night showed me where his loyalty really is. And it's not with Mason. I can't forgive that." Later, Ethan himself came storming upstairs, face red, hands gesturing wildly. "You're really going to do this to me, Dan? To your own brother? You know I can't afford rent anywhere else right now. Do you want me, Lindsay, and Caleb to end up on the street? Is that what you want?" I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "What I want is for my son to feel safe in his own home. What I want is for him to know his dad will always stand up for him. You've had a free ride here for years. Don't talk to me about what's fair. This is about respect, and you lost mine the second you chose to laugh at my kid instead of teaching yours how to act like a decent human being." His words tumbled out, accusations, guilt trips, even a few swipes about me being too soft, too protective. I didn't budge. My voice stayed calm, and I repeated the same thing, 30 days. Be out. What Ethan didn't know was that Mason was sitting at the top of the stairs, listening quietly. When Ethan finally stormed off, slamming the door behind him, I turned and caught Mason's face peeking around. For the first time since that awful dinner, I saw the smallest smile tug at his lips. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told me everything. He knew I was on his side, and in that moment, that was all the reassurance I needed. Ethan's voice cracked as he scrolled through rental listings on his phone. The numbers glared back at him. Too high, too far, too impossible. His savings account was a joke, barely enough to cover moving trucks, let alone a deposit. He rubbed his face with both hands and muttered, "This can't be happening." But it was. Daniel had been clear, 30 days. No extensions, no negotiations. Desperation drove Ethan back downstairs late that evening. He knocked on Daniel's office door like a man about to beg for his life. "Dan, listen," he started, voice low and shaky. "Can we just stay until summer? By then, school will be out. We can transition easier. Please." Daniel didn't even look up from his laptop. "No, Ethan. 30 days. You need to figure it out." Ethan's chest tightened. "I've got nowhere to go. Do you want to see your nephew on the street? Do you want Lindsay and Caleb bouncing from motel to motel?" His words came in frantic bursts. Daniel finally raised his eyes, steady and unshaken. "What I want is for Mason to feel safe in his own home. What I want is for my brother to respect boundaries. But clearly, that's too much to ask." From the kitchen, Lindsay's voice cut in like a whip. She had been listening the whole time. "You're ruining Christmas forever, Daniel," she snapped. "This will be the year Mason remembers how cruel his dad was to his own family." Daniel stood, slow and deliberate, and faced her. "You think I'm cruel? Cruel is letting my kid be mocked under my roof. Cruel is letting it slide, because boys will be boys. If protecting Mason makes me heartless in your eyes, then so be it." Lindsay's face flushed red, her fury mixing with disbelief. She stormed out, muttering under her breath about betrayal. Ethan followed, defeated, slamming the door behind him. A few days later, cardboard boxes lined the hallway. The air in the house felt heavy, filled with resentment and unspoken words. Caleb, dragging his feet, shoved toys and games into a box. Mason lingered near the doorway, silent, hugging a stuffed dinosaur. Caleb smirked when he caught Mason watching. "Guess you finally get your precious house back, huh? Maybe now you'll stop being such a baby." The words sliced through the air. Mason flinched, his small shoulders curling inward. But before Daniel could step in, Mason's eyes flicked to his father. And this time, instead of tears, he saw calm resolve. Daniel didn't scold Caleb. He didn't lecture or fight. He simply put a hand on Mason's shoulder and guided him away. His silence was louder than anything he could have said, an unshakable message: "You're safe. I've got you." In that moment, Daniel knew he had made the right choice. Ethan's pleas, Lindsay's fury, Caleb's cruelty. None of it mattered compared to Mason's sense of security. Protecting his son wasn't up for debate. Not now. Not ever. Moving day arrived like a storm cloud, heavy and thick with unspoken words. The morning air was cold, and Daniel stood by the window, coffee untouched in his hand, watching the moving truck rumble into the driveway. For weeks, he had anticipated this moment, equal parts dread and relief, and now it was here. The movers got straight to work, climbing the porch steps with boxes stacked so high they could barely see over them. Ethan trailed behind them, barking instructions like a man trying desperately to control something slipping out of his grasp. His face was pale, drawn tight, and Daniel could see the strain of sleepless nights written across it. Inside the house, Lindsay moved like a storm in heels. She carried smaller items, though it was clear she wasn't helping so much as making a point, each slam of a box on the floor echoing like a protest. Every time her eyes met Daniel's, they burned with accusation. She didn't need words to say what she was thinking. You ruined this. You ruined us. Caleb shuffled along with a backpack, muttering under his breath. He thought he was clever, whispering just loud enough for Daniel and Mason to hear. Guess we're too dumb to stay here anyway, he sneered once, smirking as if he'd won something. Mason shrank back, but Daniel's hand landed gently on his shoulder, steady and firm. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The house felt different already, emptier even though the furniture was still being moved. The echo of footsteps, the scrape of cardboard against the hardwood, the slam of doors, it all felt like closure. Daniel stood tall in the living room, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Ethan finally broke the silence. Dropping a box near the door, he straightened up and looked at his brother with weary eyes. You're really going to do this? His voice cracked, not with anger but desperation. You're really going to choose pride over family? Daniel's jaw tightened, but his response was calm measured. He met Ethan's eyes, unwavering. No, he said, his voice steady. I'm choosing my son over bullies. For a moment, the room froze. Even the movers seemed to hesitate, sensing the finality in those words. Lindsay stopped in the hallway, glaring, her lips pressed into a thin line. Caleb rolled his eyes and muttered something about overreacting, but Daniel didn't flinch. Ethan's face twisted with frustration. He opened his mouth as if to argue again, but then shut it. He looked around the house, the same walls that had sheltered him for years thanks to his brother's generosity, and the reality sank in. Whatever leverage he thought he had was gone. With a sharp, bitter breath, Ethan grabbed the last box in his arms and stormed toward the door. Fine, he spat. Have it your way. The door slammed so hard the walls trembled, and then silence followed. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt the weight on his chest ease. He looked down at Mason, who was staring at the empty doorway with wide eyes. Daniel squeezed his son's shoulder. It's over, he whispered, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, Mason believed him. The house was quiet in a way Daniel hadn't felt in years. The slam of the door from Ethan's departure still seemed to echo, but now there was only silence, broken occasionally by Mason's footsteps as he moved through the living room, glancing at the empty space where Caleb's gaming console had once sat. Daniel stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. For a long moment, he thought the quiet would bring peace, but instead it carried weight. Mason patted over, his small voice breaking the stillness. Dad, is Uncle Ethan mad at us? His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the kind of innocence that wanted everything to be okay. Daniel set the mug aside and knelt, meeting his son's gaze at eye level. Buddy, he began, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes protecting family means letting go of the ones who hurt us. Mason's brows furrowed as he thought about it, but he nodded slowly, as though he understood more than his young age should have allowed. The following weeks were an adjustment. The holidays passed without Ethan's family dropping by, no extra voices, no laughter in the dining room that masked underlying tension. Instead, it was just Daniel and Mason, quiet dinners, long walks in the cold air, and afternoons spent building Lego castles that stretched across the living room floor. And in that quiet, something changed. Mason began to speak up more. At school, his teacher told Daniel that Mason had raised his hand in class more often, volunteering answers instead of shrinking back. He came home proud, telling Daniel about how he'd stood up for himself when another kid tried to cut him in line. It wasn't just confidence, it was trust. Mason had seen his father choose him, not just with words but with action. He knew beyond doubt that his dad would always be in his corner. That bond strengthened each day, weaving itself into small moments. Mason climbing onto the couch to rest against Daniel's shoulder during a movie, or asking him for advice before bed. Ethan remained distant. Weeks turned into months with little more than cold texts about logistics, mail, bills, the inevitable paperwork from the landlord chain. Lindsay stayed silent, and Caleb's name wasn't mentioned again. And though part of Daniel grieved the fracture in his family, the regret never came. Because when he thought back to that Christmas night, what burned wasn't just Caleb's words. It was Ethan's silence. His brother, the man who had shared his childhood, who had been there for milestones and mistakes alike, had stood by while his son was mocked. That was the real betrayal. So no, Daniel thought as he tucked Mason into bed one night, this wasn't pride. It wasn't spite. It was justice. Justice for the boy who needed his father more than anyone else. And as Mason drifted off to sleep with a smile, Daniel knew he had chosen right. Always, he would choose his son. Do you think Daniel made the right decision by walking away from his family, or should he have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear your perspective. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss one.